Morning, guys. Here out again, yet again, enjoying another beautiful morning here under the porch. Kind of had this in mind when I built the place. Just out here, actually, still working on some of the interior of the lodge, so my coffee routine is a little interrupted. But we're out here starting the day off with a water and getting some of the emails and my morning routine done, if you will. Today's topic that we're going to chat about, guys, is something that I feel is pretty important about early season. If you follow the channel at all in the past, you'll know that I love early season. I think it's a great time to be very successful on a lot of farms across the country in a lot of different regions, of the whitetail range. But sadly, I also feel that it is a can be a huge devastation to any farm, and especially when there's a parcel that is being hunted by more folks than one. It can be a huge step in the wrong direction to get the season kicked off, right? So a couple things that we're going to talk about here this morning. One, guys, I really believe that the biggest mistake probably that most folks make early season is harvesting does. Years ago, like I've always said on a lot of these videos, guys, I can tell you this because I've experienced this firsthand, right? I've done that and made the mistake. It wasn't until when my guiding career started, so dating myself here a little bit, but going back about 20 years, right, that I really started putting a lot of thought into why we don't and why we shouldn't harvest does early season. Well, so there's a couple things that tie into that. One, guys, I was kind of in that time when you hear of separate counties in, like, state of Wisconsin, Buffalo County, for example. There's many areas around the country that do an earn a buck, right? Well, you can reach out to any of those outfitters in that area, or if you're tuning in from that area, you can see what that has done or had done in the past. Had a lot of good friends and clients that came from that area, and it supercharged pressure right off the bat. Was it a good theory, to try to get some numbers under control? Oh yeah, it was, for sure. But you're putting that much pressure in the woods before. Good thought, bad outcome, right? So I highly recommend that if you're going to, you've always heard this, if you're gonna harvest a doe early season, make sure it's after you shoot a buck. Well, that doesn't always happen, right? We're excited, we make a little noise in the stand, we probably ruin the spot that we're in for the rest of the evening. But if that opportunity presents itself, I would highly recommend taking full advantage of it and doing that then and there. So that's one of the biggest things. When do we shoot does? So shooting does, to me, guys, is a crucial part of your management plan, but it has to be done at the right time, like we said, right? So what I always teach and put in my habitat plans for my clients and really try to emphasize is this: just because your property doesn't need does harvested doesn't mean that your neighbors does. It's kind of it's an area wide thing as far as total deer numbers, but it's very property specific when it comes to how many deer per property have to be harvested, and that is all directly attached to correct habitat in the correct areas, more contour on a property, more places you can hide deer. So if it's 40 acres, let's say, and 20 of it's open pasture, or 20 of it's ag and the rest of it's open timber, or 20 of it's ag and the other 10 of the other 20 acres is good habitat density. So there's really a lot of variables. The way I gauge that is, guys, is we take our deer numbers throughout the entire fall and through the entire season at your stand locations per your hunt. And then what I do is I recommend gauging the late season hunting as far as the does on that those numbers. Now, it's like I said, it's very property specific and it's very area specific. So I would not recommend taking your numbers from a like, let's say all of your numbers from a gun stand where maybe you can see the ag field, or you can see one of your big food plots or something like that. We want to know total deer numbers, how they're interacting per the design, per the flow of the property at different locations. And the reason for that is, guys, is this: when I design a property for folks around the country, I'm always making sure that there is ample habitat pockets, starting out with your doe bedding areas, and then habitat pockets down along the transition, and then internal, that giving the opportunity for the internal of the property to be able to house bucks, hopefully mature bucks, right? Those habitat pockets along that transition, guys, between stand locations, are where you're going to find that your it's kind of your overflow does, right? The does that get pushed out of the bedding, maybe they're just not as social as the rest of those. They hang up in those those habitat pockets that I create. Those habitat pockets can also be immature bucks, something that puts up with more foot traffic or more drama past those locations, right? But if you get lucky enough and your stand assemblage presents where we're 200, 300 yards between stands, or contour that we can get them closer, the more of those habitat pockets that you can put in between stands. Hence, they have to be in the right spot so you can get in and out of the stand, not busted. There's a fine line there, right? That danger zone, right, that you hear me talk of around the stands. So usually they're about 75 yards or 100 yards between or from a stand location. So if your stand locations are 300 yards apart, maybe you can get 2 of those in line, right? The reason I'm putting some emphasis on that is this: they're overflow does, they're immature bucks, something that are going to put up with more drama, and then that releases the pressure from the internal of the farm. So we bring that opportunity to the table to be able to have, or house, if you will, more mature bucks internal of a property, inside of the core, and we tie that right back to our point of impacts. So the perfect world is, like we say, per my designs, if you follow along, when we're putting that stuff on the whiteboard, and I'm really coaching as far as the build part of that, is you know how much emphasis I put on my point of impacts. That's why we put those habitat pockets in the right areas. Then we go down internal, in front of hopefully each stand on the property. They all can't have that, but hopefully the majority of those have a buck bedding pocket tied to it. Tie that, or out in front of it, you tie that back to that point of impact at the stand location with a buck bedding corridor, and bam, you're in business. Why am I touching on that, and why am I putting so much emphasis on that in this video? Is because it releases the pressure of the property. So after that build portion of it is done, and we have the correct habitat, so our property is able to house as many deer as possible, right? But as many deer as possible that the property has to offer per the habitat. So what we do then is, when we take our numbers per the hunt at the stand locations, and then we gauge our harvest out on the big beautiful food plots and out on our ag per the year. Now, I do still use those numbers that you see from a gun stand out in the food plots or out in the ag that maybe you can see, right? But I don't bank the whole doe harvest on just strictly 30 deer, 30 does out into a food plot, right? Because if they are all transferring, let's say from 4 or 5 different locations, 6 locations, whatever that is on your property. And the reason for that is this: if all of the does are ending up in one location, that destination feed location, and we're gauging our numbers off there, but they're all coming from maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 locations on your property and all ending up in the same spot, well, you're getting inaccurate numbers. So what you want to do is you want to take those numbers per your stand locations, per your hunt. So the best way to gauge that is this. Simple math is this, guys. So what I do is I try to use this method, right? And then you add your numbers in, this equation, you add your numbers in per your property. If you are setting in a stand And one of my clients calls and says, Josh, I had the best hunt I've ever had. I had 30 does walk past my stand. We've got some work to do, right? We've got some work to do habitat wise, and we've got some work to do we have some work to do with doe numbers as far as managing those doe numbers come the late season. So yes, we're all about seeing deer right from the stand, but I don't know about you guys, but I don't need to see any more does the rest of my life. I need to know where the does are at so I can properly have my stand assemblage correct to see the what we're after, right? The importance of the mature buck, right? So that's kind of what I gauge that on. If my clients call or a family member calls and says, hey, I had a great hunt, and even on my properties that we're still in motion of building, and they say, hey, we seen 30 deer tonight, my radar, it immediately goes off and we start dissecting how many of those were bucks and how many of those were does, because the best scenario would be a bunch of bucks, right? But if they're 30 deer, it's probably dominated by does. What that tells us is we are in front of the doe movement, which ties into the last topic here, guys. That's why another reason we don't take our deer numbers, our doe numbers early, or start our doe harvest early season, is because of that. Because there are a lot of cases, I've got 3 or 4 of them here on the farm, one that we're kind of sitting twiddling our thumbs, right, waiting for the right wind to get on a buck that's using that area. But a lot of times our early season sits, because we're not hunting mornings, because we're not down in the timber, we're maybe on field edges, maybe on the edge of a in a shot plot situation where we've built in an inside corner, and then we're passing those deer on out of that little tenth or 2/10 of an acre shot plot, and then pushing them out into a food plot so we can get out of Dodge, right? That's why we don't take those numbers from there, because you may see a lot of numbers going past you early season because you're ahead of the does. What we want to take those numbers from is the core of the hunting season, from your pre-rut stand locations. And I think that'll really help you as far as tuning in on, do we need to harvest does or do we not? It surely has helped me over the years, guys, and I know it's helped a lot of my clients. Just remember, because the farmer down the road that's got a couple hundred acres, 400 acres of maybe a dairy farm, and he's got really good soil and really good crops, just because he doesn't, or he's overrun with deer and needs some does harvested, doesn't mean that you're 20 or you're 40 or you're 80 that may even adjoin to him, or that's a half mile down the road, needs does harvested off from it. So it's kind of a community effort, but please, I encourage you to really dig into that as far as, does my property need does harvested? And I would highly recommend not hunting the does early season for those reasons, guys. And I think what that'll really help you is that will keep your pressure low on the property, and not being in there shooting those does. It's a great way to tune in your setup, right? Know you're on target. But every time you shoot a doe early season and that doe goes internal of the property, your heart should stop, because you have to go in and retrieve that deer. How do you go in? One thing we'll touch on here before we close out, how we go about that. I don't track any deer after the opening of the season unless it's under the cover of darkness, and I always try to get a pickup or my side-by-side or something like that. Guys, this is going back to the days of guiding, where we have to put other clients right in there after. We have to keep a farm functioning. I try to get that truck as close as I can, leave the truck running, leave the lights on, go in there after dark. So I would encourage that, even with, if your neighbor shoots a buck, it runs over on your property, highly recommend doing that as well. Do it after dark. The deer are kind of out of your area of pressure, that where we don't want to be putting those pressure on. You go into the timber, you get those, and you can kind of run those deer off, if you will, alert them with the trucks and the lights. And every time that you do that early season, right off the bat with those guys, especially when those does are over the feed, over your food plots, over your corn feeders, stuff like that, that starts that chain of pressure, guys. And like we said, that's not at all what you want, because that will definitely, no matter if you're not in a high pressured state and you're doing that, you're going to have a high pressured area very quickly. by harvesting those too early. Thanks, guys.